The Maplewood Terrace condominiums in eastern Pennsylvania were built with a primary goal: inclusivity for all. Situated just outside Allentown, they had gently sloping ramps by each entrance, wide hallways that accommodated wheelchairs, and thoughtful signage to help those with visual impairments navigate the building. This commitment to universal design stood out in a region where older properties frequently lacked such features. Residents took pride in these accommodations. Every door boasted a sign that included both raised lettering and Braille, ensuring visually impaired individuals could identify units, laundry areas, communal lounges, and the mail center. Even the elevator panels featured tactile indicators for each floor. The management team and the Homeowners Association, HOA, believed that this was more than a formality. It was a moral imperative. Everyone deserved to move about freely and safely. However, not everyone felt that way. Barbara Clifton was in her mid-50s, with a short, stylish haircut and a preference for neatly pressed pastel blouses. She had moved into Maplewood Terrace just a year earlier, and in that short time, had cultivated a reputation for nitpicking. Behind her back, most neighbors called her Karen. The reasons were varied. She lodged constant complaints about minor issues: someone leaving a welcome mat that wasn't building compliant, or the trash chute door staying open too long. If a neighbor's decoration even slightly strayed from the norm, Barbara would email the HOA's board, demanding corrective action. Despite the building's inclusive mission, Barbara complained relentlessly that the Braille signage was ugly and out of sync with the decor. She insisted that the small lumps of raised dots ruined the lobby's classy aesthetic. The fact that the signs served a vital accessibility function seemed lost on her. In her mind, the primary function of a building's interior was to exude tastefulness and uniform style, no matter the cost to others. At first, her gripes were limited to pithy statements at monthly HOA meetings. "These lumps on the signs remind me of acne," she once declared. The board politely responded that the Braille plaques were required by law and, more importantly, provided independence to visually impaired residents. Barbara would give a dismissive wave. "It's a shame, but perhaps we could find a way to hide them better." Still, no one took her too seriously. Most members assumed that she'd eventually let the matter go. Braille signage was not up for debate, and the majority of the HOA supported it wholeheartedly. They had no inkling how far Barbara's frustration would push her. In quieter moments, she seethed, resentful of the building's unwavering stance. She felt overshadowed. Everyone around her championed inclusivity, while her aesthetic complaints were met with exasperation or ignored. By mid-spring, tensions were palpable. On one side, the building's staff and residents who cherished the inclusive signage, and on the other, Barbara Clifton, the self-appointed design guardian. She was determined to eliminate those lumps of plastic. And in her twisted logic, if conventional methods of persuasion failed, perhaps something more extreme would do the trick. As the days lengthened and the first hints of summer warmth touched the Maplewood Terrace gardens, few residents suspected the firestorm, literal and figurative, that would soon engulf their beloved Braille signs. Barbara's quiet hostility was about to morph into something shockingly destructive, forcing the entire community to confront the darkest side of her obsession. A rainy Tuesday brought the monthly HOA meeting to the communal lounge, a cozy space with plush chairs, a coffee machine, and large windows overlooking a modest courtyard. Barbara arrived early, her binder of recommended aesthetic guidelines in tow. She wore a neutral expression, though her eyes flickered with annoyance whenever she passed a Braille sign. Minutes before the session commenced, she cornered Robert Hernandez, the current HOA president. "We really need to finalize a plan regarding these signs," she began. "I know you keep saying they're necessary, but the building's appearance is just so compromised. Shouldn't we consider smaller Braille plates, or maybe a single directory in the lobby with tactile features, rather than plastering them on every door?" Robert adjusted his glasses. "We've been over this, Barbara. Having Braille right on each door is essential. It allows visually impaired residents or guests to confirm they're at the correct unit. A single directory in the lobby can't replicate that. This is not up for debate." His unwavering stance made Barbara's temper flare. "I see," she muttered, turning away. For her, a single tasteful directory was enough. She believed that the building's mandated compliance with accessibility laws was more flexible than they claimed. She told herself that the board was just lazy, not exploring more aesthetic solutions. The meeting itself touched on typical condo issues, parking concerns, new trash disposal hours, the upcoming hallway recarpeting. Barbara's attempts to revisit the Braille signs were politely sidestepped. "We've addressed that, Ms. Clifton," another board member reminded her, gently but firmly. As if to punctuate the board's stance, the building manager even praised a recent order of updated Braille signage for the third-floor hallway, which had replaced older, worn plates. Barbara fumed in her seat. Later, as she walked back to her unit on the second floor, Barbara paused by one of the newly installed Braille signs. She felt a surge of contempt. Gently pressing a fingertip against the raised dots, she marveled at how it felt under her skin, a tactile script she didn't understand or care about. All for a tiny minority, she thought with a sneer. Why must the rest of us live with these hideous lumps? That was the moment her mind drifted from mere complaining to active sabotage. She recalled how plastic burned. If these signs were melted or destroyed somehow, the HOA might give up on them, especially if it happened repeatedly. The more she considered it, the more a grim sense of possibility arose. If they keep getting ruined, maybe they'll abandon the idea, she rationalized. She quickly dismissed the moral and legal ramifications. To her, it felt like a last-ditch method to correct the building's design. In the days that followed, Barbara's sense of inhibition eroded further. Each time she passed a Braille plaque, her thoughts gravitated toward the idea of defacing or removing it. At one point, she even tried picking at one corner, only to find the adhesive was quite strong. She needed something more decisive. Fire might do the trick, she reasoned. The building's signage was plastic, presumably flammable. It might leave behind blackened lumps that would be scrapped entirely. The subsequent fiasco would drive home how ugly these lumps were, and perhaps the board would cave. Her personal convenience store purchase, a small butane lighter with a locking flame, was the final step. She tested it discreetly in her kitchen, verifying the intensity of the flame. The reality of committing arson, however small in scale, stirred a tangle of excitement and anxiety. She tried to rationalize it. "I'm not burning the building, just removing a blight." That line of thought exposed a chilling readiness to cross legal and moral lines over a petty aesthetic grievance. All it would take was a single unguarded moment in the lobby, or perhaps at night in a quieter corridor. She'd strike the lighter, watch the plastic bubble and blacken, maybe blow out the flame quickly, just enough to ruin the sign. She even pictured the aftermath, a scorched plaque, the board forced to remove it, maybe opting for simpler, smaller replacements. Fueled by this twisted vision, Barbara's plan crystallized. She'd set a test burn soon, see how easy it was, then decide whether to escalate. Little did she know how drastically her plan would unravel, not only endangering property, but rousing an uproar that would spark the entire building's solidarity, ending in a powerful stand for accessibility that would overshadow anything she did to destroy it. A balmy Thursday evening found the Maplewood Terrace lobby mostly empty. Around 8 p.m., a few residents drifted in and out, someone grabbing mail, another heading to meet a rideshare. The building's desk clerk, an older gentleman named Jerry, typically left at 7 p.m. after finishing daily tasks, meaning the lobby was unstaffed for the night except for occasional security patrols. Perfect conditions for mischief. Barbara Clifton waited until she heard the elevator doors close with the last departing resident. She stood near the mailboxes, scanning for cameras. The building had a few, but the main camera in the lobby was angled primarily at the front doors and desk. The signs in question, large plaques reading "Lobby" with Braille underneath, were installed on the wall near the elevator bank. If she was quick and discreet, the camera might not catch her. Steeling her nerves, she slipped the butane lighter from her purse. Her heart hammered. She was about to commit arson, however small. A voice in her head whispered warnings. This is a crime. If you get caught, you could face felony charges. But a louder, more irrational part insisted this was the only way to send a message about the building's decor crisis. Biting her lip, she approached the sign that read "Lobby" in white letters, with Braille bumps beneath. She flicked the lighter. A tiny flame appeared, dancing in her trembling hand. She pressed the flame against the bottom edge of the plastic plaque. It took a moment, but soon the plastic began to soften, warping under the heat. An acrid smell rose. The edges blackened, and the braille bumps contorted into melting lumps. Barbara's pulse soared. She had intended to blow it out quickly, but a piece of the sign ignited more fiercely than expected, flaring up with a small tongue of flame. Panicking, she yanked the lighter away, trying to extinguish it by flapping her hand. That only half worked. A small portion of the sign burned, dripping hot plastic on the floor. She cursed under her breath, stamping the molten plastic with her shoe to quell the tiny ember. The smoke wasn't thick, but an unmistakable chemical stench lingered. An overhead smoke detector beeped once, then fell silent, presumably not registering a strong enough presence of smoke to trigger a full alarm. Barbara's heart pounded like a jackhammer. She glanced around, terrified that someone might appear. The damage was done. The sign's lower half was destroyed, a jagged black char marking what once was neat braille text. In her panic, she realized she'd left behind a small scorched patch on the adjacent paint. It was more than she'd planned, but there was no going back now. She quickly stooped, scraping up a bit of melted plastic with a tissue, tossing it into her purse. Then she bolted for the stairwell, wanting to avoid the elevator's cameras. Moments after she disappeared, the corridor remained silent, a faint smell of burnt plastic dissipating. For a minute, no one noticed. Then, from the hallway leading to the parking garage, a resident named Allison Wu stepped into the lobby, crinkling her nose at the smell. Spotting the half-burned sign, Allison gasped. She hurried closer, alarmed by the scorched plastic and the black smear on the wall. She immediately used her phone to call building security. Within minutes, a security officer arrived, mouth agape at the blatant vandalism. The building's front doors and mail area had been defaced by an arson attack, however small. Word spread fast. Residents trickling in from a late grocery run or returning from work found themselves confronted by a swirl of speculation. Who would do this? Why burn a braille sign? The once quiet lobby was soon buzzing with fear and disbelief. Barbara Clifton, meanwhile, locked herself in her condo, adrenaline coursing through her. I only meant to singe it a bit. Why did it burn so hot? She wondered. But as her anxiety cooled, a smug satisfaction emerged. Mission accomplished. Now let's see what they do. What Barbara had not anticipated was the magnitude of fury that such a hate-fueled act would unleash. By morning, the entire Maplewood Terrace community would rally in a way that would overshadow any fleeting triumph she felt, and set the stage for a powerful stand against her destructive impulses. By sunrise, the building's residents awoke to frantic texts and emails. Someone set the Braille lobby sign on fire. Photos circulated, showing the sign's lower half charred. The Braille lumps melted into a smear. The general reaction was shock and anger. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. It specifically targeted accessibility features that many regarded as central to the building's identity. That morning, a contingent of concerned neighbors gathered around the scorched sign in the lobby. The smell of burnt plastic lingered faintly. Building security had cordoned off the area with caution tape, but the damaged plaque remained visible, a stark testament to the maliciousness behind the act. Robert Hernandez, the HOA president, arrived looking grim, accompanied by a police officer who took photos and statements. The officer explained they'd investigate it as possible arson or a hate crime targeting disabled individuals. If caught, the perpetrator faced serious legal consequences. Residents erupted in discussion. Mark Taggart, a visually impaired lawyer who lived on the 4th floor, expressed sorrow and rage. Those Braille signs are how I find my way around. Why would someone hate them enough to do this? He ran a hand along the broken edges, feeling the melted plastic. It's shocking. I never thought it possible in Maplewood. Allison Wu, who discovered the damage, recounted the acrid smell. It was fresh when I walked in. If I'd been a minute earlier, maybe I'd have caught whoever did it. Others murmured about the camera angles, whether they might show someone lurking. Building management promised to check the footage thoroughly, but the main camera in the lobby wasn't aimed directly at the sign. They might only see fleeting glimpses of a figure, if at all. During an emergency HOA board meeting convened later that day, tensions ran high. Robert Hernandez addressed a crowd of about 50 residents. We cannot stand by while vital accessibility features are vandalized. We're cooperating with local police, and we'll do everything in our power to identify the culprit. Meanwhile, we plan to replace this sign immediately, and not just this sign. We're considering upgrading all Braille plaques to a more robust, tamper-resistant material. Applause and nods of agreement met his statement. Barbara Clifton stood near the back, arms folded, attempting a show of outrage. She feigned shock, shaking her head as if appalled. Inside, her nerves thrummed. She worried about security footage or forensics. She realized how naive she'd been to think the building might simply remove the Braille sign and not replace it. Instead, they're doubling down, she thought, frustration mingling with fear. Still, the crowd's immediate condemnation of the act forced Barbara to maintain a facade. She put on her best scowl of disapproval, leaning over to a neighbor and whispering, "What a shame. I hope they catch whoever is responsible." Each word felt like a boulder in her throat, but she repeated the sentiment to appear above suspicion. Two older residents, both partially blind, spoke tearfully about how the Braille signs gave them confidence in navigating the building. The very thought that someone had deliberately destroyed an accessibility feature stung like a personal attack. They pleaded for the building to stand firm, to respond by making the signage even more secure. That idea quickly gained momentum among the group. If a criminal wanted to intimidate or harm visually impaired residents, Maplewood Terrace would do the opposite, bolster protections. By the end of the meeting, the HOA board had voted unanimously to expedite a project for metal Braille plaques, fire-resistant, tamper-proof signs for every door in the building. They would also install additional signage in areas that previously hadn't needed it, just to show that we'll never be bullied out of inclusivity, as one board member put it. Barbara felt her heart sink. More signs? More Braille? At every single door? She could hardly believe how spectacularly her scheme had backfired. Rather than diminishing or removing the signage, the building was now about to plaster Braille plates everywhere. She left the meeting with a forced smile, heading back to her unit. Inside, she slammed the door, trembling with a mix of fear, rage, and disbelief. Little did she realize the scope of the transformations about to unfold. If she disliked the old Braille signs, the new metal ones, sleek, robust, and clearly built to endure, would prove an even greater affront to her aesthetics. And the wave of community solidarity behind them would make it nearly impossible for her to voice further objections without drawing suspicion. In the days following the lobby fire, the Maplewood Terrace complex turned into a hive of activity. Journalists from a local paper caught wind of the story. Someone had burned a Braille sign in a building known for championing inclusive design. A vile, hateful act, arson against accessibility, read one headline in the small free newspaper distributed around Allentown. This fueled residents' determination to respond decisively. Emails and flyers circulated, announcing a special fundraiser to help offset the cost of purchasing fire-resistant, tamper-proof Braille plaques for every door. While the HOA had some emergency funds, the scale of the project, covering nearly 200 units, plus corridors and communal spaces, was significant. The flyer read, "Let's show that Maplewood stands for inclusion. No act of vandalism can stop us. Donate if you can, volunteer if you have time." Donations poured in, from modest $10 gifts to large $500 checks from a few affluent residents. Even local businesses chipped in, charmed by Maplewood's stand for disability access. Within a week, they'd raised enough to order a full set of custom-made metal plaques, each featuring raised lettering, grade 2 Braille, and a protective coating that was fire-resistant up to several hundred degrees. The idea was that if another would-be arsonist struck, the metal wouldn't simply melt or burn away. During this period, Robert Hernandez and building manager Deborah Lewis worked tirelessly to coordinate with suppliers, ensuring the new plaques matched the building's design. They chose a brushed steel finish that looked sleek and modern. The Braille text was etched in black, and a final layer of protective lacquer sealed the entire piece. Not only were they functional, they were quite striking. Some residents even commented they improved the building's look. Meanwhile, many residents stepped forward to volunteer. They helped measure doors, compile lists of exact text for each sign, and gather location data for every public area that needed labeling. Laundry rooms, trash chutes, community lounges, even small storage closets. The new standard, anywhere a sign existed, a Braille plate would follow. In fact, as a statement of defiance, they decided to label even more areas that had never been labeled before, like the corners of each corridor, small utility rooms, and some seldom-used corners of the basement. "No one can burn all of them," Deborah joked, half laughing. Others nodded, a fierce pride in their eyes. Barbara Clifton hovered on the outskirts of these efforts. She attended 1 or 2 organizational meetings, but kept quiet, offering only superficial support. Inside, she seethed at how wholeheartedly the community had embraced this push. Her darkest fear was that any new signs would be even more ugly lumps defacing the decor. But now, if she so much as hinted at dislike, she'd appear suspicious or callous. So she forced a smile, nodding along whenever the project's organizers enthused about their next steps. A small knot of paranoia also gripped her. What if the cameras had recorded her that night? She rewatched the lobby area a few times from a distance, noticing that while the camera mainly faced the entrance, there was a chance it caught her reflection. She anxiously awaited news of the police investigation. Nothing emerged, though. The detectives apparently had no conclusive footage. The sign's meltdown offered little forensic evidence except that a small flame had been used. The police did interview multiple residents, but no arrests came. Encouraged by the building's unstoppable momentum, Mark Taggart, the visually impaired lawyer, offered to assist in finalizing the legal aspects, ensuring the building complied with ADA guidelines. He was thrilled by Maplewood's resolve. "We're not just meeting the minimum standard, we're setting an example," he told a local reporter. Indeed, Maplewood was fast becoming a shining instance of what an inclusive living environment could be. Barbara watched, horrified yet powerless, as stacks of newly minted metal braille plaques arrived in the building's lobby. The very spot she'd tried to deface became ground zero for a proud display of accessibility. Boxes labeled fireproof/tactile signage were carried in by volunteers, each eager to begin the installation. The irony was too much for her. If only she'd left well enough alone, the old plastic signs might have remained. Now, these robust, official-looking metal plates would define Maplewood's identity even more prominently than before. A warm Saturday dawned, and Maplewood Terrace buzzed with a sense of purpose. Volunteers in matching T-shirts emblazoned with "Maplewood Proud" gathered in the lobby, sipping coffee and receiving instructions from building manager Deborah Lewis. Stacks of metal braille plaques, each meticulously labeled for a specific door or location, lined the walls. Electric drills, adhesive kits, and a variety of hardware were neatly arranged on folding tables. Barbara Clifton lingered at the periphery, once again faking supportive interest. She'd volunteered for the day, only because not volunteering might raise eyebrows, and was assigned a runner role, tasked with fetching supplies or delivering plates to the correct floors. As she looked at the robust signs, each shining with a brushed steel finish and crisp black lettering, her stomach churned. They're worse than the old ones. Much more conspicuous, she thought, trying not to grimace. Despite her disdain, she went through the motions. She carried boxes from the elevator to the second floor, where a team of residents used power drills to remove the old plastic signs and position the new metal plaques. She heard them chatting excitedly about how durable and attractive they were, how proud they felt that Maplewood was taking a stand. Occasionally, Mark Taggart would run his fingertips over a newly installed sign, smiling at how crisp the braille felt. The entire atmosphere was one of unity. The building had turned a horrifying act of vandalism into an opportunity for progress. For Barbara, it was a surreal day. Each door she passed, particularly those that had yet to receive the new signage, reminded her of the old plastic plaques she'd so despised. She recalled the smell of melted plastic in the lobby, the thrill and panic of holding that lighter. Now, the end result was the opposite of her plan, an unstoppable wave of brand-new braille plates that the building cherished. She felt trapped in a nightmare of her own making, forced to help install the very features she hated. At one point, she paused by the door to the community lounge, pressing a palm against her forehead. The pressure of secrecy and guilt weighed heavily. What if someone found out? She thought. How do I reconcile all this? She realized that if she'd been discovered as the arsonist, she'd likely be evicted, possibly jailed. Yet part of her mind still raged that the building was effectively doubling down on these unsightly lumps. During a lunch break, the volunteers gathered in the courtyard, munching on sandwiches provided by the board's snack fund. Laughter and chatter filled the air. Mark Taggart sat with the group, describing how the new signage meant so much to him. I used to rely on memory or guesswork for some lesser-labeled areas, he said. Now I'll know exactly which door leads to the mailroom on each floor or the utility closet. I can explore with confidence. It's liberating, truly. Others chimed in. A longtime resident with partial sight loss nodded vigorously, thrilled at the thoroughness of the signage. Even fully sighted neighbors expressed relief that the building was forging a safe environment for all. Robert Hernandez gave a short, impromptu speech. We've shown that one hateful act can't stop Maplewood from being a place of acceptance. The new signs are a testament to our resilience. Barbara forced a stiff grin as everyone raised plastic cups in a toast. She felt like an interloper in a moment of triumph. A pang of conscience gnawed at her. She recognized that her petty aesthetic gripe had collided with real human needs, and lost, as it should. The question was, could she live under the weight of that truth, or would her resentment drive her to further extremes? As the day's installation wound down, residents admired the shining plates that now marked nearly every door on the first 3 floors, with plans to complete the upper levels the following weekend. Maplewood had effectively become a fortress of Braille signage, each plaque a small victory over the forces of exclusion or sabotage. And ironically, Barbara, the saboteur, had contributed hours of labor to see it done. The transformation of Maplewood Terrace didn't go unnoticed outside its walls. Local news outlets ran human interest pieces praising the building's response to the Braille arson. One anchor, bright-eyed and enthusiastic, reported, "In Allentown, a shocking act of vandalism has led a community to unite in support of its disabled residents. Maplewood Terrace is installing fireproof Braille signs on every door, sending a powerful message that intolerance won't be tolerated." Social media picked up the story. A handful of local disability advocacy groups lauded Maplewood for turning a hateful act into an accessibility victory. They posted photos of the building's new signage, praising the board's leadership. Some even expressed interest in adopting Maplewood's approach for other buildings. Online commentators left supportive messages, inspiring to see a community stand up for inclusivity. We need more places like Maplewood. Within Maplewood, morale soared. The older Braille signs, once overlooked by many sighted residents, now became a symbol of perseverance. People developed a renewed appreciation for each small plaque, knowing that behind it lay a story of resilience. Mark Taggart, happily guiding a visiting friend through the corridors, beamed with pride as they traced the raised steel text, each door labeled precisely. "It's like the building's soul is being spelled out for everyone," he joked, but with genuine emotion. Meanwhile, Barbara Clifton found herself under subtle scrutiny. While no direct evidence pointed to her, some neighbors recalled her past complaints about the Braille signs. They noticed she never posted on social media congratulating the building's new approach. She seldom joined in the celebratory conversations. A few times, residents mentioned to each other in hushed tones, could Barbara be involved? She always hated the signs. But the rumors stayed quiet, lacking proof. For her part, Barbara tried to maintain the facade of supportive neighbor. At the grocery store checkout, she'd overhear someone praising Maplewood, and she'd politely chime in, "Yes, we're proud of the new signage." Inside, though, she was a cauldron of resentment and fear. She'd wanted the signs gone. Now she was forced to watch them multiply like steel-shelled mushrooms. That fear spiked when she got an unexpected call from a detective assigned to the arson case. He asked if she'd be willing to come to the station and answer some routine questions, as they were speaking to multiple residents. Barbara's mind reeled. She dreaded that her name had surfaced in a rumor or that camera footage might show her silhouette. But she couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion, so she agreed. Arriving at the police station, sweaty-palmed, Barbara was ushered into a small interview room. The detective, a calm presence, asked standard queries. "Where were you at 8 p.m. that night? Did you see anything suspicious? Did you have any reason to suspect someone might want to vandalize the signs?" She answered carefully, lying about being in her condo the entire evening, claiming she heard nothing. She feigned concern about the crime, using her practiced lines. "This is so terrible. I hope you catch whoever did it." The detective took notes, occasionally glancing up. Barbara couldn't tell if he suspected her. In truth, he had no direct evidence. Her answers were plausible. She left with a forced smile, her pulse hammering. The weight on her chest felt crushing. She'd just lied to law enforcement about a felony-level act. Yet no immediate consequences followed. Back at Maplewood, the final wave of sign installation was nearing completion. The building's top floors were now thoroughly labeled, the basement and utility areas too. Soon, Maplewood would stand as a fully Braille-empowered environment, each door proudly brandishing its tactile ID in shining metal. With each passing day, residents found fresh reasons to celebrate the sense of unity. And for Barbara, that unity only magnified her isolation. As Maplewood approached total signage coverage, the building planned a modest unveiling ceremony, a day to publicly declare the project finished and celebrate the triumph of inclusivity. Mark Taggart would give a short speech, Robert Hernandez would cut a symbolic ribbon, and local disability advocates would be present. The board even invited the press to highlight the rebirth of the building's identity after the hateful act. Barbara Clifton, however, was in turmoil. On one hand, her greatest fear remained being unmasked as the arsonist. On the other, she burned with resentment each time she saw how everyone praised the new signs. She still viewed them as an aesthetic blight, more glaring than before. She fantasized about a second sabotage, one that might hamper the final unveiling. If multiple signs were defaced, maybe the building would reconsider or at least reduce the scale. Her rational mind recognized how risky that was. The building now had additional security cameras. Residents were on high alert for suspicious behavior, and the signs themselves were metal, more resistant to flame. She'd likely need a stronger accelerant to do lasting damage. Still, the idea gnawed at her. If I don't act now, I'll be forced to live in a building plastered with these lumps forever. She weighed the risk of prison against her obsession with restoring order. Days before the unveiling ceremony, in a moment of reckless desperation, Barbara purchased a small canister of industrial solvent that boasted a high flammability rating. She reasoned that even metal signs could be blackened or partially ruined by intense heat or corrosive chemicals. She hid the canister in her bedroom closet, waiting for an opportunity. Part of her nearly hoped for a reason not to proceed, some sign that the building might revert to simpler signage. But that sign never came. As the unveiling day approached, Maplewood's excitement grew. Volunteers polished the new plaques, ensuring each door was pristine. The local TV station lined up an early morning spot for the big day. A sense of triumphant anticipation filled the air. Meanwhile, Barbara's tension soared to a near breaking point. She had nightmares of being caught red-handed, fantasies of the building returning to normal, swirling confusion about whether to commit a second crime or let it go. Amid her turmoil, a subtle shift crept in. She began to see, with pangs of guilt, how deeply people treasured the new signage. She caught glimpses of Mark Taggart's broad smile as he navigated the corridor unaided, reading each door sign with his fingertips. She overheard older residents expressing relief that their partially blind relatives could visit unassisted. She sensed the building's camaraderie, a newly forged bond grounded in empathy. One evening, as she paced her living room, Barbara experienced something close to remorse. She recognized that her aversion to Braille lumps was trivial compared to the freedom they granted others. A rational voice asked, "How could you do this again? You nearly committed a hate crime once." For a fleeting moment, she toyed with the idea of confessing privately to the board, pleading for forgiveness before she inflicted more damage. But the fear of legal repercussions froze her. Instead, she moved the flammable canister to the trunk of her car, uncertain whether she'd use it or discard it. With the unveiling just days away, Maplewood was on the cusp of a grand celebration. Neighbors shared excitement about balloon arches, refreshments, even a small donation drive for future improvements. For them, the Braille signage project was a testament to resilience and compassion. For Barbara, it was an existential crisis. Continue her sabotage or let the building's unity triumph over her aesthetic obsession. The long-awaited day arrived with bright sunshine and a gentle summer breeze. By mid-morning, Maplewood Terrace's lobby was adorned with cheerful decorations, colorful balloons, and a modest banner reading "Accessibility for All." The staff set up a folding table with pastries and coffee, encouraging residents to mingle before the official unveiling ceremony on the second-floor landing. Local reporters hovered, chatting politely with Robert Hernandez and Deborah Lewis about the building's transformation. They marveled at the new metal braille plaques gleaming from every door in sight. Mark Taggart paced around confidently, demonstrating how quickly he could read each sign. Several visually impaired visitors from a nearby advocacy group also came to witness the event, praising Maplewood's initiative. Barbara Clifton lingered near the back of the crowd, arms crossed, heart in her throat. She had decided, after sleepless nights and tearful internal debates, that she would not sabotage the unveiling. The risk was too high, and her guilt too great. Instead, she tried to feign enthusiasm, wearing a subdued smile whenever a neighbor greeted her. But inside, she felt waves of shame. If only they knew what I did, she kept thinking. The ceremony began at exactly 10 a.m. in front of the elevator bank on the second floor, site of the once-scorched sign. Now, a polished steel plaque reading second floor lobby in Braille took pride of place. Robert Hernandez welcomed everyone, acknowledging the chilling act of vandalism that had triggered Maplewood's remarkable response. We stand here today to celebrate resilience. We replaced fear with determination, turning a destructive event into an opportunity to enhance inclusivity, he declared. Applause erupted. Next, Mark Taggart took the microphone. His voice wavered with emotion. I was angry and scared when I learned someone had burned our signage. For me, Braille is a lifeline, my eyes, in a sense. But the outpouring of support from you all reminded me that hateful acts can't overshadow kindness. Now, Maplewood is an even stronger example of accessibility. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. The crowd responded with cheers, several people brushing away tears. Amid the applause, Barbara felt a lump in her throat. She realized, in that instant, the magnitude of the damage she had tried to cause. Mark's gratitude for these signs was palpable, almost tangible. She thought about the raw fear that must have gripped him when hearing of the initial arson. A wave of remorse flooded her. If she'd carried out a second attack, would Mark have felt unsafe in his own home? The group parted ways as Mark and Robert grasped a ribbon stretched across the corridor, cutting it ceremonially with a pair of oversized scissors. Cameras flashed, capturing smiling faces. The new Braille sign behind them gleamed, a symbol of triumph. Residents clapped and whistled. A few chanted, "Maplewood proud." In the back, Barbara inhaled sharply. Overcome with emotion, she slipped away from the crowd, heading toward the stairwell. Her vision blurred with tears. This was the culminating moment, an entire community celebrating empathy, while she stood as the hidden saboteur. She knew deep down that she owed them an apology, even if it meant risking everything. Yet fear paralyzed her. Could she face jail? Eviction? The scorn of every neighbor? Her thoughts churned as she descended to the first floor. She collapsed onto a bench near the mail area, pressing her palms to her temples. The press coverage, the building's unwavering unity, Mark's heartfelt words. None of it would have happened if not for her destructive act. That knowledge did not comfort her. Guilt gnawed at her soul. She recalled the second canister in her car trunk, the half-formed plan. What was I thinking? Nearby footsteps broke her reverie. She looked up to see Robert Hernandez, evidently having slipped away from the ceremony. His expression was gentle. "Barbara, you okay?" he asked. "You look upset." She swallowed, forcing composure. "Just overwhelmed, I guess. It's an emotional day." She lied by omission. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're all a bit emotional," he said kindly. "But it's a good day, I think." She nodded mutely, tears threatening to spill. She realized she could either maintain the lie forever or find a shred of redemption by confessing. As Robert turned to go, she opened her mouth to speak, but no words emerged. Fear sealed her lips once again. All she could do was watch him walk away, feeling the weight of her unspoken truth. In the weeks after the unveiling, Maplewood Terrace's fresh Braille plaques became a point of pride across town. The local newspaper published an op-ed lauding the building's refusal to be cowed by hate. Disability advocacy groups reached out to Robert Hernandez, asking for advice on replicating Maplewood's initiative. Even city council members mentioned the complex as a shining example during a municipal meeting on improved accessibility standards. Day by day, the building settled into a new normal, with residents seamlessly adapting to the updated signage. Some joked they should install Braille plates for everything, right down to the potted plants. Mark Taggart, returning from a business trip, found each corridor had even more consistent labeling than before, allowing him to navigate with zero confusion. He marveled at how an act meant to sow fear had ended up empowering him beyond measure. And what of Barbara Clifton, Maplewood's hidden arsonist? She remained haunted by her secret. Each time she glimpsed the shining metal plaques or heard neighbors praising the building's progress, guilt flared. Yet she couldn't bring herself to turn herself in. She dreaded the legal fallout, the condemnation. So, instead, she changed her behavior. She withdrew from the HOA's design committees, no longer pushing her aesthetic agenda. She stopped nitpicking neighbors for minor infractions. Some saw it as a sign that Barbara had mellowed out, and they welcomed the reprieve from her meddling. Inside, she struggled with remorse. She realized how her obsession with appearances had led her to commit a vile, discriminatory act that could have endangered lives if the fire had spread. She recognized, too, that Maplewood's Braille signage was more than a decorative choice. It was a lifeline for many. On a few occasions, she considered leaving the building entirely, starting fresh somewhere else. But finances and pride held her in place. One late afternoon, she encountered Mark Taggart alone in the corridor, carefully reading a newly installed sign for a small meeting room. She hesitated, then offered a soft greeting. He nodded politely. "These signs are fantastic," he said, smiling. "I can't tell you how grateful I am." The pang of guilt stabbed deeper. "That's good," she managed. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to blurt out an apology. "I'm sorry for everything. I almost took this from you." But the words stayed locked in her throat, and she fled to her unit soon after. Time marched on, and Maplewood resumed its daily hum of life. Children laughing in the hallways, neighbors exchanging pleasantries, the hum of laundry machines in the communal washrooms. The Braille plaques, once a source of petty frustration for Barbara, now formed an unassailable fixture of the building's identity. No second sabotage ever occurred. She didn't have it in her to repeat that crime. The detective eventually closed the arson case for lack of leads. Some residents remained uneasy that the culprit remained at large, but as months passed without further incidents, the sense of lingering dread faded. Maplewood's strong stance and robust signage overcame the shadow of Barbara's misdeed, forging a lasting environment of acceptance. Under the surface, Barbara quietly learned a searing lesson. Her hateful impulse had triggered a wave of goodness that dwarfed her malice. That truth gnawed at her, but it also offered a strange form of redemption. She glimpsed the possibility that people were basically decent, and that her petty desire for uniform decor was dwarfed by the moral imperative of ensuring everyone's dignity. Though she never publicly confessed, a subtle shift in her attitude took root. She no longer sneered at Braille signs, at least. Sometimes, she even found herself gently running a finger across the raised dots, silently acknowledging their importance for others. In the end, Maplewood thrived. The building's new Braille plaques, and the story behind them, sparked admiration and replicated efforts in neighboring complexes. Residents found fresh pride in calling Maplewood home, each sign a testament to solidarity. And though Barbara Clifton's soul remained burdened by her secret wrongdoing, the community at large embraced a happy ending, a renewed spirit of unity, an unbreakable commitment to accessibility, and a triumphant rebuke to any force that would extinguish it.